Flipping back to main.js here, let's regard this component for a moment. I said that's about as simple as components get, but it's not quite as simple as components get. So this thing has no state, and it doesn't really do anything else except render. Do you remember, I think yesterday I said that components are a bit like functions, and the props are basically just arguments that you pass into those functions? Well, sometimes that's literally what they are. If you don't need state, you may not actually need to use a class. There's some other things that determine that. Like there's some other things that you inherit from React component lifecycle functions, for example. There are these functions that automatically run at certain points in the life of the component. For example, right before the page renders or right after the page renders, stuff like that. If you need to take advantage of that behavior, then you need to inherit still. But if you don't need that and you don't need state, then you can actually just make your component a function. And it's called a stateless functional component. And there are a number of advantages to that. For one thing, it's just plain simpler not to inherit. It's a little tiny bit more performant. And our code's just a little simpler. So since we don't need state here, at least not yet, I'm going to make this a stateless functional component because I always do until I know I need otherwise. So instead of making a class, I'm going to do this. So I still want the thing to be called main. So I'm just going to make a variable called main, const main, capital M, equals a function. You're pretty much never going to see me write the word function again. I'm going to use arrow functions all the time. So I'm going to say const main equals an arrow function. So on the right side of the equal sign, you just make an arrow function. And if you're doing a stateless functional component, you don't have a render method because you don't have methods. This isn't an object with methods. This is just a single function. So this is the render function. Our one function here is the render function. So I just need to return some JSX. Now that is as simple as a component gets. Stateless functional component. It's just a function that returns a React element, which we represent with JSX. If all is well, and I flip back to the browser, I now have an exclamation point there, main. So it worked. Totally valid React component. The notes for today's class will have some links if you want to read more about stateless functional components and the advantages, because there are some you might not think of. But we don't need to belabor the point in class. So use a stateless functional component. Stateless because there's no state. Functional because it's a function. Question? So I'm going to use those anytime I think I can.